Hello everyone, welcome to another video talking Geeky stuff. Yes, today is going to be about Street Fighter 2, the franchise. So I could have talked about Street Fighter as a whole, but I decided to focus on Street Fighter 2 because I believe that, in my personal opinion, and I think everybody probably agrees with me, that it's probably the most influential game in the Street Fighter series and probably the most influential beat 'em up fighting game of all time that kind of started a revolution, really. So let's go back to Street Fighter. Of course, let's go back before that. The original Street Fighter came out back in 1987 in Japan. I think the world got it about a year or 2 years after that. So, for example, in the UK, Street Fighter came out, I think, about the 88, 89. And I remember that time, even back in the 80s, the graphics were amazing. You had six buttons, fighting, you got like the Dragon Punch, Fireball, all that kind of stuff. I remember the arcade cabinet, you had big buttons. It's supposed to be kind of like pressure points where the harder you punch or the harder you hit, the harder the punch is in the game. It was a decent game, but at the 80s, the technology was kind of like limited, but it did a good job for its time. Fast forward to 1991, when Street Fighter 2, braced the world, and he offered something that Street Fighter did, a one-on-one combat, side with no 3D, but he added a lot more character to it. He made Ken and Ryu a bit more cooler, I suppose, better graphics, and he added a whole bunch of characters that you can play with. Because I think back in the original Street Fighter, if I remember correctly, correct me if I'm wrong, you can only pick Ken and Ryu. But the new Street Fighter 2 had these characters here, all of these characters, and you can, I think, you can unlock a character. Was it this one or the one after? It's been such a long time. So let me know in the comments. And I remember that this came out and this took the world by storm. In the UK at that time, young teenager like myself, we would go to the arcades. Unlike today, where arcades are practically dead everywhere, because the home technology has advanced so much that home consoles, the graphics are like 4K and all that stuff. Arcade just can't keep up with it. But back then, you want the best graphics, you go to the arcades. And Street Fighter was, at that time, was the game, the best game at the time in the arcades, in my opinion. And yeah, so many teenagers went to the arcades, just money after money after money. So in the arcades back then, it was funny. You had like, after, I think there was certain rules you had, like little rules you pick up. Fair fighting, no tap tap and walk up and throw the opponent. So like one after the other. You set up tournaments. Might be like my friends versus another group of people. So like 5 versus 5, see who wins. That kind of challenge. And it all started off with just people just using Ken and Ryu, and slowly people understood like how to use Dao, Sim, Gao, Chung Li, and yeah, the tournament just kicked in. Yeah, okay, back, and then it was almost like, because where I went to school, I tell you, even if anybody was a teenager back in the early 90s during the Street Fighter era, you will know that back then you had convenience stores, news agents, even takeaways. That every corner shop, small shops will have a cabinet, at least 2 cabinets of Street Fighter. So I remember I was in school, like lunch break, we would go out, buy some takeaway food, and in the takeaway, our local takeaway, there was arcades. So not only that we spent our money on food, we spent another few more pounds on the arcade machines. And literally every store, just not convenience store, newsagent, takeaway, had at least one cabinet of Street Fighter. It was on the news, it was on the TV, it was in the magazines. The word was going around in school. Can you beat this? He was the best fighter. She was this, and in school he was the number 1 person to beat. All that crazy stuff. And yeah, then not only that, on the way home after school, there was a little detour, about 5-6 minutes away. There was my local arcade. So it was such a hard thing. It was almost like a gambling addiction for a teenage kid like me. I would divert. I would say to myself, no, I got maybe a couple of pounds left, probably play a game or two. End up going there, spend all my money, stay there for a few hours, come home like 7, 8 o'clock in the evening, 3 to 4 hours after my school. And I spend all my pocket money. Oh my days. I remember back then my mum would be so, what did you do? Why are you so late? Spending all your money, all your pocket money on arcades is ridiculous. She even kind of grounded me from going to arcades. But of course, now a young rebellious teenager never listens, so I always end up going to the arcades. I remember in the arcade there was like rules where you couldn't do things like I mentioned, and sometimes, especially with the older teenagers, there were loads of fights. Someone would get beat all the time, and they just couldn't take it, and so they ended up punching the other person. So fights would break out a lot. So yeah, those were the mad days. And then when Capcom announced they were going to port it over to the consoles, first the Super Nintendo, and at that time, I don't know if any of you remember back time when there was arcade conversions, and during the SNES time, even the Nintendo Master System arcade conversion was never really that good. But then when the first graphics screenshots came out, unlike today, you get like like a video of someone playing the gameplay. But back then it was just in magazines, so you get like photographs or the screenshots. I was blown away by how good the graphics were for the Super Nintendo. And I remember when it got launched, the campaign was so big, people were eager, waiting in the queues. So I got my copy of Street Fighter 2. I always didn't understand why the Western covers were so badly, the artwork was so bad. So anyway, I purchased it. And when I took it home, I realized, because the weird thing was, out of a group of my friends, I was the only one who had the UK Super Nintendo. My friends had either the Japanese one or the US Super Nintendo. And when I played it at home here, well, I was thinking, why is it so slow? I went to my friend's house, he's playing in pretty speed. And that kind of got me into trying to understand the technology. I think it was Street Fighter that really got me into imports and technology, because if anybody remember back in the 80s, 90s, the UK system consoles were using PAL, and it was running at 50 hertz, and the graphics wasn't that sharp, it was slow. And the Japanese and the US ones were running on SCART cable, and the game was 60 hertz. That's when I thought, you know what, me and my brother took, our spending money, chipped in, combined our money, and went and purchased. We was originally going to buy the Japanese version, but what we found out, what happened was, if you buy the American Super Nintendo, you can just open up where the cartridge slots was, take a couple of things out, and the American SNES console, you can actually take Japanese cartridges. So we bought the American console. Out of all the consoles, is my least favorite design, because I prefer the Japanese and UK Super Nintendo console. I didn't like the square and the color purple, but we went for the US version because all you do is just unclip a couple of things and you can play both Japanese and American games. And then me and my brother sold our UK Super Nintendo, a bundle with Super Mario and other games, so we got some money back. And then we went and purchased the import Japanese Street Fighter 2, which at that time was about 80, 90 pounds or something like that. It was pretty expensive. So anybody complaining about games are getting expensive, try it back in the day when cartridges were standard. 60, 70 pounds was standard. Anyway, to me, at that time, it was money well spent, because we saved a lot of pocket money. Our dad just, he chipped in the other bit, so we got it home and we played it. And then a few weeks later, or 2 weeks down the line, a magazine came out. I can't remember the magazine. They gave us a cheat. It's like up, down, left, right on the console, the controller. And then what you can do, it gets another setting. You can actually play their clones, like a Ryu. You can play the Ryu in white, and then you can pick the same character in Ryu in blue. And that was cool. So we played that. And I tell you though, once you played in 60 hertz, put in scarp, the graphics sharpened up. It's amazing. The gameplay flowed very well, and it was near arcade perfect at that time. That's what you called arcade perfect. And and then what happens? Was going around my friend's house, was taking consoles there, playing Street Fighter, bought extra controllers just to play 2 players. It was amazing. I remember even in the news that time, it was like that game helped sell Super Nintendo. And then I think about a year or so down the line, we were one of the few people that had 2 consoles because originally, then my brother, his birthday, he wanted to get a Mega Drive. So we both of us chipped in to get a Mega Drive. And we got Street Fighter 2 Champion Edition for the Mega Drive. Graphically, it was good. It wasn't as good as the Super Nintendo, but we ended up getting all the Street Fighters on the consoles, except for the Super Street Fighter 2 for the Mega Drive Genesis, because our preferred console that time was Super Nintendo, and it was for the right reason, because it was had better graphics and sound. So we ended up getting all the Street Fighter 2s for the Super Nintendo. I just remember that time, it was seriously, when Street Fighter was around, I mean, it puts like Super Mario, Legend of Zelda, Metroid aside. We were just so focused on Street Fighter 2, and it was literally taking the world by storm, especially young teenagers like us at the time. And moving on, like all great franchises, there was always spin-offs. I remember back in a couple of years afterwards, we was in the anime, and then we was just buying anime then, because internet wasn't around then, and there was talks about a Street Fighter movie. It was in then at that time, if it was a manga entertainment, they got the rights to it, and they released it in VHS format. And of course, the first thing we did was we purchased it, and I thought it was a great anime movie. One of my favorites. I thought the fight scenes were great, animation was great, and then from there you had the TV show like Street Fighter 2V, which is pretty decent, and the crappy Street Fighter 2, the anime series. I think it's by the Westerners, the Americans. I don't know why their art style was so rubbish. I mean, I remember watching 1 or 2 episodes. I didn't like it. I didn't even finish it. Then I think, who can forget Van Damme's Street Fighter? That movie was so bad that, I remember watching it again a few years ago. It was still bad, but it was bad in a corny and somewhat funny way. I mean, it's definitely, if you haven't seen it, I would actually recommend it, because it is so bad, it's funny. And I think I remember recently reading Van Damme. He was kind of high during this filming of that, and you can tell he was high. He was just phoning it in. I felt he had a lot of fun making that film. Then you got the other two, like Street Fighter Assassin Fist and Street Fighter Legend of Chun-Li. They haven't had any luck with Street Fighter live action. I still think they can still do a good live action if they put a bit of heart and soul into it, I suppose. Then the comics. I remember the first comic was a manga on, you can see the top right, Street Fighter 2 by Tokuma Comics. That was a great comic, that was. And then the Americans tried it with Street Fighter. Seigo problem is, I don't understand why they got some crappy artist to do it. No disrespect to the artist himself or herself. It was terrible. And then I think a few years down the line, you had Udon Comics. You got the rights and start doing Street Fighter, and I felt the art style really suited. They gave a lot of respect to the art and the franchise, and you can tell that the guys behind Udon Comics were big fans of Street Fighter 2 and the franchise. And not only that, if you look at the Street Fighter franchise, not just Street Fighter 2, but Street Fighter franchise, some of their art style is fantastic. So I used to collect a lot of art books, because I used to kind of get inspiration from how they drew art and so on. And things like encyclopedia, these characters, you want to know a bit more about their backstory. So a lot of these other books were pretty good, and I purchased a few of them and got inspired by some of the art styles. So if you haven't picked up some of the art books, definitely check it out. And as I mentioned in the early part, in my opinion, is the most influential fighting game of all time, really. as much as I had to say it is the most influential. Street Fighter 2 inspired a whole wealth of fighting games. You can say even inspired the 3D games, inspired the Super Smash Brothers. I don't think, yeah, that if these games would come out if there was no Street Fighter 2, I don't think the fighting genre would be this big without Street Fighter 2. And here's some of the list of games that came afterwards: Street Fighter 2. And I could have added more, of course, but these are some of the games that I actually enjoy playing after Street Fighter 2, an alternative. But I'm telling you, I think Street Fighter, I can't understate it how important the game is, not just to me, to many millions of teenagers through the 90s, the mid 90s, but as industry, the gaming industry as a whole, not just in fighting genre, just the gaming industry in whole. I think the culture it brought to the geekdom is is unpercent, and I can't pronounce the word anyway. It's so important that you cannot overlook it. Anyway, thank you. Oops, let's skip the scene. So yeah, I kind of rushed this. I won't say I rushed this, but there's a couple of things I forgot. You probably noticed I forgot to put my Talking Geeky Stuff logo and my thank you for watching. Please subscribe. But anyway, hope you liked this video and let me know. Did Street Fighter 2 impact you the same way it did? And thanks for watching, and until next time, good morning, good afternoon, and good evening, wherever you are. And please stay safe. Goodbye.